The USG Ishimura, an immense Planet Cracker class vessel, known for having the most resources collected out of any ship in the entire CEC, responsible for the downfall of all mankind, and many ruined bedsheets. Containing almost the entirety of the most influential sci-fi horror piece of media in the last decade, the USG Ishimura is a masterclass in atmospheric level design and engineering made terrifying. Through his escapades, Isaac Clarke fights his way through endless amounts of reanimated corpses in locker rooms, navigation centers, medical decks, smelting rooms, gun turret sections, food production centers, and engineering decks. Its influence on the tone and atmosphere of the game cannot be understated. The interconnected world and clever use of realistic sci-fi brings each area to life in a way that makes me wet the bed. Apparently, it makes Isaac do the same, since visiting it just once to see his girlfriend and do some side jobs leaves him traumatized for life. Hallucinations of Nicole taunt him throughout the second game, and the stone cold Chad himself even starts to show some signs of being scared when faced with the reality that he will once again be having to take an adventure through the Ishimura in Chapter 10 of Dead Space 2.
It's a really bad idea.
I'll stick around. I'm full of bad ideas.
You may not think of Dead Space 2 as a particularly speedrun-friendly game. It's extremely linear, has tons of unskippable cutscenes, and is a horror game. And if it was 2019, you would be absolutely right. Chapter 10 in particular was bad for this. Tons and tons of waiting on doors, walking, a little bit of combat, and elevators permeated the run. At this point in time, the run was basically glitchless, and it was just over 2 hours long. Chapter 10 was a whopping 15 minutes of the run. That's nearly an eighth of the entire game. At the time, the community was really small, with only a handful of people who had ever even attempted a run before. It's not like this is particularly difficult or anything. The most popular category was any percent, which plays on the casual difficulty. And like I said, there was essentially no glitches. The game was just simply underdeveloped. However, this was all going to change heading into 2020. Just like you should change the color of this button and subscribe. Dead Space 2 went through a scientific revolution these past 2 years, bringing the time down from 2 hours and 5 minutes all the way down to 1 hour and 6 where it is today. New discoveries and an emphasis on pushing the game forward instead of competing for records took hold of the community. Tools were discovered and developed to systematically and efficiently break apart every small piece of the game possible. Despite this, for a long time, the last bastion of the glitch-free world was Chapter 10.
Did it just work?
Even into August of 2020, the chapter was essentially glitchless, still taking around 14 minutes to complete when the run was already down to a 1 hour and 45 minute time. However, this was about to change, and in August of 2021, Chapter 10 would be down to 5 minutes flat. How did this happen? Chapter 10 was supposed to be the unbreakable Ishimura. When the rest of the run fell apart under pressure, it remained strong. What changed? Well, in order to explain this, I'm going to take you down a trip of scientific exploration within the Dead Space community to figure out just what was necessary to break this behemoth of a level. Flashback to 2019, starting Chapter 10, Isaac rides this gondola to the flight deck. He then waits for some dialogue and heads down memory lane, all while Nicole whispers sweet ASMR into his ears. After about a minute of walking, he arrives at this long hallway filled with baddies. Enemies aren't really a big deal in the speedrun since we play on the easiest difficulty. However, this room is a bit different. This room has 2 brutes in it and a hack panel at the end. In order to progress, you must complete the hacking minigames uninterrupted by the enemies. Normally, this means that you have to kill them all. Once Isaac makes his way past all of the enemies, he heads up a super long elevator and gets stuck in the decontamination room for about a minute. After that, he heads through a hallway full of pukers, who could slow him down before he even gets to the gravity puzzle. The puzzle restores functionality to the tram system, allowing him to head to the gravity tethers at the front of the ship. After this flying around, Isaac heads back through decontamination room and is stuck once more. This time, he has to fight some enemies. The waiting length in this room is based on the enemy pattern that you get, and you can lose around 5 seconds with a bad pattern. Once more back up the elevator, Isaac heads to the tram and towards the gravity tethers, but in a cruel, ironic fate, Ellie jinxes him and he has to stop by the medical deck.
Hole in the medical deck. At least you won't have to go through there.
Unexpected obstruction ahead. Shutting down. Welcome to the medical deck.
Crap.
The medical deck is a formidable contender for the most likely horror map to fit a rave, but it also features a hack panel room followed by a few rooms full of enemies. One more 0G flying section, and the last room full of pukers before finally arriving at the gravity tethers. This is where Isaac proves once and for all that he is Space MacGyver, and fixes a broken tram station with a Planet Cracker spaceship's gravity pole. Tiedemann yells at Isaac, but he can't hear him over the deafening ASMR whispers of his ex-girlfriend, who guilt trips him one last time before he yeets himself into space with the escape pod. Soon after, the first thing that was discovered is that you can actually despawn the second brute in the challenging hallway near the beginning, by running into this corner and praying that he disappears. It works surprisingly well, but it didn't actually save that much time, if any at all. Killing brutes only takes one mine from the line gun, and stasising them in place wasn't very hard. Either way, it was cool, so we started using it. Shortly after this, another new discovery was pioneered. This time, it was in the field of ex-girlfriend avoidance. The master of avoiding all confrontation that Isaac has become in the last couple of months since breaking the game apart just runs right past her, activating the escape pod before she can even say a word. It turns out if you map interact to scroll wheel and run into the pod as it opens, you can enter it before she can stop you. This is a really easy time save, saving about 20 seconds. But it does break the entire game's audio until the next cutscene plays, leaving a very awkward silence. Months after the rest of the game was broken, Chapter 10 was still basically glitchless. Only the brute despawn and the ex-girlfriend Yap skip was found. It was still about 15 minutes long. This, however, was about to change when one day, Deloading was discovered. You see, in Dead Space 2, the entire map is all one level, and what part of the map is loaded is determined by where the game thinks the player is. Since it's only necessary for the sections of the map the player can see to be loaded, deloading the portions of the game that the player can't see saves resources and allows the game to run at 60 FPS on consoles. The mechanism that tells the game what part of the world Isaac is in is primarily the doors that connect rooms together. Opening a door tells the game that Isaac is there, and can cause the next few rooms to load in. This normally works really well, accurately loading in the correct parts of the world in real time and keeps the game running smoothly. Until stuff like this happens. This is how people are trying to crack the game and brought it down from a 140 to a 106 where it is now. As it turns out, there are many ways to trick the game into losing Isaac's position. This causes the game to only load level information based on what doors are open. If done correctly, this can be abused to slip through doors as they are closing and trick the game into deloading rooms that Isaac is actually in. This is called a deload, and it completely changed the game forever. There are 3 levels of deloading in Dead Space 2. Level 3 is fully loaded. All textures, collisions, doors, objects, and enemies are loaded like normal. Level 2 is a partial deload. This is usually what happens to a room just on the other side of a closed door. The room will lose its texture and become pitch black, but maintain its collision, and any scripting such as enemy spawning will all still work. However, the collision of the doors will disappear, allowing you to walk through them without loading in the room you opened them from. Level 1 loaded rooms only load in the doors and checkpoints, but not the collision. So walking into a level 1 loaded room looks like this. No matter what level a room is loaded at, as long as it at least somewhat is loaded, if you open a door, it will start to load in the level around you. This will be important later. The technique would turn out to be incredibly powerful, as most of the map maintains a level 1 load at all times, allowing the player to hit checkpoint triggers and doors much further into the game by precisely falling out of bounds and into them. Any place that was below and not too far away from a spot that could be deloaded could technically be reached with enough effort put into a setup.
Let's go, dude. Yes.
Cue flight deck skip. By opening this door, then the other one close enough together, Isaac can slip past the first one before it can close, confusing the game to his position and bringing the map down to a level 2 deload. From there, the player can open this door to load the collision in the next room, so they can set up the skip proper. Lining up in a precise way, the player gets right up to the edge of the door frame, where on the other side is a level 3 deload, meaning there is no collision. Then they can perform a stomp launch. In Dead Space 2, if you're standing on a ledge where you perform a stomp at the right spot, you will be launched super far away from it. This is one of the best ways to gain speed when falling into the void. Using this speed, the player hits the correct location in the world where the checkpoint trigger for the next section of the map is. When they load the checkpoint, boom, like magic, they skip about a minute and a half of walking in a straight line. This, however, would just be the beginning for the Ishimura's transformation into one of the most broken chapters in Dead Space 2. Right after the flight deck skip, we stumble upon the dangerous hallway from before, and a completely new use for brutes waiting inside. It was discovered about 6 months later that brutes could push Isaac through doors if they do the correct attack animations while under the influence of stasis. This was used in Chapter 6 to skip a cutscene, but it was also theorized to work in Chapter 10 in this room. The idea is to bait the second brute over to this door, the same door we used to despawn him, but this time we set it up in a way that has him try and punch us. Turns out, if you run at a certain angle while he does this, he can push you right through the door. This actually doesn't have any practical use from the get-go. The door you clip through doesn't actually go anywhere, and is deloaded past a few steps. From here, we discovered that you can do another type of launch to hit a new checkpoint trigger at the bottom of the elevator, skipping right into the decontamination room. This is by far one of the most finicky and hardest tricks in the history of this speedrun. While it was possible to get consistently, any trick that relies on enemy AI to work is bound to fail sometimes. The launch itself was fairly easy, but you only really had one try. And the brute clip, if you messed it up, was just a huge time loss. Skipping to the bottom of the elevator though saved about 3 minutes. Nearly the next day, another new skip was discovered, for the section that you land in right after the brute clip. This skip was called Contamination Skip, and it certainly lived up to its name. Using the deload technology that had been discovered alongside previously known mechanics, we found a way to skip having to do the combat in the decontamination chamber, saving a ton of time. First, Isaac would have to do the 0G puzzle like normal, but then instead of heading back to the decontamination chamber, he heads outside with high FPS to wiggle right through the wall. As it turns out, when the game is running at more than 200 frames per second, walls are paper thin and zero gravity, and you can just kinda wiggle right through them. Once out of bounds, you maintain zero gravity, but only in the bounding box assigned to have this property. As soon as you leave it, you just fall, so it's important to stay within this bounding box until you want to leave. Lining up on the roof with the puzzle, we back up till we hit the ceiling, and this aligns us perfectly straightforward, and we can use this to land on top of the door leading into decontamination. This room is level 3 deloaded, meaning if we fall into it, we won't hit collision and will fall out of the map into our deaths. This is where a door dive is performed. Door dives are where the player drops Isaac into his certain death in the hopes that he can open the door fast enough for the room to load in around him. In this instance, it only brings the room to a level 2 load, but that's good enough to save him from his certain demise. Unfortunately, this doesn't mean that he could just walk to the elevator and leave though. He loads in the elevator by opening the door before it, and this is just to fully deload the big hallway prior. This area is actually close enough to the 0G box that you can just fall out of the room and into 0G. Since both the hallway and the puzzle room are completely deloaded, it's pitch black, and this is why we placed detonator mines before. This can be used to see where the hell you're supposed to be going. From here, another door dive is done to get back into the 0G area, and this one loads in the hallway as well as the panel that needs to be interacted with. After one more small deload, the entire map from the puzzle room all the way to the elevator is level 2 deloaded. This was the whole point of this super convoluted skip. What this allows is for Isaac, after running completely blind down a hallway of powerful necros, to go right through a door frame and decontamination chamber, and head right to the elevator right after. Believe it or not, this skip saves actually a massive 15 seconds, and is way harder than the normal intended play. It may seem like 15 seconds isn't worth it, but in Dead Space 2, the game gets really optimized, and I mean really optimized. So much so that at one point, when the game had been about 2 months dry of any new speedrun skips, the world record was only 15 seconds away from the community's best possible time. That's everyone's combined theoretical best time being only 15 seconds from an actual single segment world record. In a game like this, everything that saves time must be done, or you will fall behind. These skips brought the Ishimura's time down from 15 minutes to 10 minutes and 45 seconds in only about 8 months, and this was only just the beginning. The community then turned their attention to the medical deck, as it was the only thing left in the chapter with absolutely no skips. Quickly, balcony skip was found, a small time save using kinesis to skip a few seconds in walking. But that really wasn't exactly what people had in mind when they meant skips. Surely deloads could be used here, something to skip some of the cutscenes or forced combat sections. Well, the main problem is, not many of the doors in the medical deck were close enough to each other to allow a traditional deload, and the ones that were seemed like they were designed intentionally to not let that happen. The community would have to get a little bit creative, and only a short time later they had an idea. As it turns out, the player isn't the only thing that holds doors open. Enemies can too. Using stasis to keep enemies in place at a doorway, a deload can be triggered using 2 doors really far away from each other like this. This method would change the game forever, as it opened up tons of new possibilities for deloads in the future. Here, it's useful because it allows the player to skip the hack panel door and right to the cutscene with Nicole. By opening these doors in this order, the rest of the medical deck can be deloaded at level 2, and this door that was never intended to be open in the first place can be used as a shortcut right to the end of the medical deck. For a while, the Ishimura was the hardest part of the game. It was a total gauntlet of tricks, one after another, successfully hitting brute flip, then decontamination, and then medical death skip back to back like that was super difficult, and the Ishimura became a graveyard for most runs at the time. For months, this remained the same. Current strategies just couldn't be avoided, and new skips were nowhere to be found. But surely with how broken this game is, there can be another skip on the horizon. At this point, the Ishimura was mostly dismantled. Almost nothing was done the intended way, and there was only one small combat room left. What was possibly left to break? Well, as it turns out, there was a lot left. The biggest skip to be found had yet to occur, and this time, the FPS would be the culprit once again. But not the way you think it would. Actually, low FPS is what made this skip possible. When playing with VSync on, the game is locked at 30 FPS. This delays inputs, and this makes the game feel terrible to play. But because these inputs are delayed, you can abuse this to get off of the elevator at the start of the chapter. Doing so gets Isaac out of bounds, and then he can walk over the edge here. It just so happens that the medical deck is right under this location, and if done correctly, you can jump off into the void and hit the checkpoint trigger. This will teleport you straight to the start of the medical deck. This skip is huge. It saves so much time, completely making brute clip and decontamination skip obsolete. And, surprisingly, it's actually pretty easy. This skip brings down the Ishimura to about 5.5 minutes, shattering the initial times and finally breaking Chapter 10 even more than the rest of the game was at this point. This skip was much easier, safer, and faster than previous strategies, making a run that's overall a lot safer and increasing the amount of runs completed by a lot. No longer would the Ishimura be the graveyard for speedruns, only underwear. That is to say, until a faster version of engineering deck skip was found. Just a month or so later, this version of the skip was discovered. Engineering deck door dive skip. Since the medical deck was just underneath the flight deck where you could jump off and it was level 3 deloaded, the checkpoint trigger was still there. But this also means that the doors will also still be loaded as well. And in theory, if you can open a door fast enough, then the level will load in around you, skipping ever so slightly further into the level. The thing that makes this actually a lot faster is that you don't have to reload checkpoint, so there's no loading screen. This saves time in real time and automatically sets up the deload without having to stasis these enemies. That alone saves about 20 seconds, but the best part is it makes the trick viable on the hardcore category that doesn't allow restarted checkpoints. Around this time, there was another skip found on Chapter 1 that leaves stasis behind, meaning that you could never use it in the run again. Not having stasis makes brute clips a lot harder, but one side effect we didn't see coming is that doing medical skip deload would be way harder, since you have to keep the enemies by the door without killing them. This made the skip essentially random, if it was going to work or not. This problem no longer existed with the new skip though, because you instantly got the deload when you opened the door. See, the game assumes that the area you are opening the door from is already loaded, so when it opens the next room, it fully loads it in. But when the door closes after that, it reverts to a level 2 deload. Exactly what you need to get to the medical deck skip. The combination of these tricks saves over 10 minutes across the Ishimura. What was once the last stand of the glitchless legacy in Dead Space 2 is now one of the most broken chapters in the whole game. The Dead Space community has been one of the most innovative and passionate speedrunning communities I've ever had the chance to be a part of. And it's truly crazy how literally anything that they try will work in some way at some point in the future. Just goes to show the power of never giving up and always trying to innovate. You can't move up if you're always looking down. Much love, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider supporting me on Patreon like these lovely individuals. Also, huge shout out to the Dead Space speedrunning community. You guys are super awesome. I'm glad to have helped build this awesome community.